Most anglers are getting way more bites than they think. They just don't recognize them. And it's not their gear. It's not the fish. It's that they're waiting for something that usually never comes. I know this because when I started seriously bass fishing, I was missing bites constantly. And I honestly had no idea. See, I grew up on the Texas coast, targeting speckled trout and redfish, using artificial lures, and those fish are famous for absolutely crushing a bait. A lot of the time, if you're not paying attention, they'll rip the rod right out of your hand. So when I transitioned to bass fishing in Central Texas, I expected every bite to feel the same way. And I was wrong. What's funny is that after really learning to detect subtle bass bites, it made me a better inshore fisherman too, because I finally started catching those soft trout pickups that I'd missed for years without even realizing it. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what bass bites actually feel like, why beginners miss so many of them, and the few simple things you can do right now to start feeling more fish. Let's get into it. What a bass bite actually feels like. Let's start here, because this is probably the biggest misconception in bass fishing. If you're waiting for every bite to feel like a freight train, you're going to miss a lot of fish. Yes, sometimes bass absolutely crush a bait. Reaction baits like spinner baits, chatterbaits, crankbaits, fish can crush those, no doubt.
There we go. There we go. There we go.
But a lot of bass bites, especially on soft plastics, are much more subtle than people expect. Sometimes it's just a tiny tick on the line, a little extra weight. Your lure suddenly feels kind of mushy. Your bait stops moving before it should, like it just hit something soft. Or sometimes the only thing you notice is your line slowly drifting sideways. That's it. That's the whole bite. And a lot of bites honestly don't even feel like a fish. They just feel off. And that's actually the key. Experienced anglers aren't sitting there waiting for a thump. They're paying attention to anything unusual, anything that's not what the lure should be doing. Which brings me to the most important thing in this entire video. You can't recognize something abnormal until you understand what normal feels like. Here's what I mean. Imagine you're dragging a Texas rig across gravel. It's been bumping and ticking along for 20, 30 feet. You know that rhythm. You felt it cast after cast. Then it just suddenly stops. Not really a snag feeling, not a hard thump, just stops and feels slightly heavy. That's a fish. But here's the thing. You only recognize it because you know what the lure is supposed to feel like. You felt it 100 snags, you felt 100 rocks, 100 mud pockets. So when something doesn't match that pattern, your brain flags it. That's what you're building towards. You need to learn what the lure feels like coming through grass, over rock, over wood, over mud, what the bottom contact feels like where you're fishing, what your line tension normally feels like between casts. Because once you understand what normal feels like, suddenly those tiny little changes start jumping out at you. And a lot of those changes, those are fish. Now, there's something I see all the time that makes this even harder. And I'll get into that in just a second, but first I want to talk about why beginners miss bites even when they're paying attention. There's a few big reasons, and most of them aren't what you'd expect. The first one is fishing too fast. And I've said this in a lot of my videos, and I truly believe it. Especially with bottom contact baits. Texas rigs, jigs, Ned rigs, worms. A huge percentage of bites happen when the bait is barely moving. If you're cranking it back to recast, you're missing fish. The second is too much slack line. Some techniques need a little slack, but if there's a big bow in your line, from the wind or just from not managing your line, subtle bites, they disappear. You simply can't feel them. The third is your rod tip is too high. That one's kind of sneaky. A lot of anglers hold their rod tip up constantly, and it creates slack, it kills sensitivity, and it keeps you from maintaining as direct a contact as you can with the lure. Lower your rod angle, more contact. And honestly, the fourth reason is the biggest one: expecting bites to be more dramatic than they actually are. A lot of fish are missed because anglers think, nah, that's probably nothing. Meanwhile, it absolutely was a fish. Now, remember that thing I said I'd come back to? Here it is. There's a lot of times when you see the bite before you ever even feel it. Your line, it just kind of twitches just a touch. It jumps slightly. It starts swimming sideways. This is especially true with lighter baits, pressured fish, cold water, or fish that are just mouthing the bait without committing. So here's a real example. You might cast your lure, it hits the bottom, you get a little slack in the line, and then that slack just slightly starts to move. Not a big dramatic pull, it's just kind of drifting off. Like something picked it up and started walking with it slowly. If you're not watching your line at that moment, you have no idea. Line watching, it's a skill of its own. Start making a habit of watching where the line enters the water. Anytime that lure starts to barely move, a lot of experienced anglers, they'll catch fish this way that most people in the same boat would never even know they had a bite. Now, at some point in this conversation, gear does always come up. Sensitivity, braid versus fluorocarbon, more expensive rods. And I want to address that because there's something that often gets lost in that conversation. And yes, I've said it in pretty much all my videos. Gear does matter. I'll be straight about that. Braid is more sensitive because it has no stretch, so you feel everything more directly. Fluorocarbon is also more sensitive than monofilament for the same reason. It has less initial stretch and better transmission. And fishing with braid with a fluorocarbon leader gives you a little bit of advantage in clear water as well. Gives you the best of both sensitivity and stealth. But here's what gets lost. I've seen people with expensive, high sensitivity setups miss bites constantly. And I've seen experienced anglers detect bites with entry-level gear because they're trained themselves to pay attention. A lot of what people call sensitivity is really just focus and experience. And like I said, I'm not saying that sensitivity doesn't matter, but those fundamentals of understanding what's happening, your focus and your experience, they truly matter. The gear helps, no doubt, but you can't buy attention. And speaking of focus, here are a few small habits that have the biggest impact on actually feeling more fish. These aren't complicated, but they do work. Put a finger lightly on your line. So when I palm a reel, I put a finger on the blank right here. I put a finger up here in front of the reel seat, and I lay a finger right under the level line so the line lays on top of it. You'll feel vibration and changes that your rod tip alone might dampen by having that line just touching your finger. Keep your rod angle lower when possible. So you think about a Texas rig, you pull it up, right, to lift it off the bottom. Don't pull up your slack like that. Lower your rod tip, pull up your slack, and leave it low while you're waiting. And then the next time you pull it up, repeat. Try to keep that rod tip as low as you can to feel more of those bites. And keeping that rod tip, it gives you closer direct contact.
There he is.
So more information is coming back to you. And slow down. I say this over and over again, slow down. I've already said that about fishing speed, but it applies to mindset too. And what I mean by that is the more rushed you are mentally, the less you notice. And that one might be the most honest thing I say in this entire video. A huge amount of bites happen the moment you check out mentally. You made 3 casts, nothing happened. You start looking around, you glance down at your phone, you're thinking about something else, and that subtle little tick happens right in that exact moment. And you might notice it, but since you're checked out, you don't react fast enough. Staying mentally present on each cast is genuinely an angling skill. It sounds soft, but it's real. So here's the bottom line. If something feels different, set the hook. Slightly heavy, set it. Stops too early, set it. Line moves sideways, set it.
Oh, thought I had one there. Saw my line moving.
Hook sets are free. The worst thing that happens is you swing and nothing. Swing and a miss. The best thing that happens is you land a fish you would have completely missed. And here's why that matters beyond just catching that one fish. Every time you set the hook on a weird little feeling and it turns out to be a fish, your brain files that away. And now you've got a record of that feeling. You're building a library. Over time, you stop second guessing yourself because you've felt it before. That experience is what separates anglers who consistently put fish in the boat from anglers who are consistently saying, I'm just not getting any bites today. They're getting bites. They're just not recognizing them yet. Learning to detect bites is genuinely one of the biggest turning points in bass fishing. Because once you stop waiting for obvious strikes and start paying attention to subtle changes, you realize you were probably getting a lot more bites than you thought the whole time, and you start putting a lot more fish in the boat. If this video helped, subscribe and check out my other videos on fishing fundamentals, the basics that actually move the needle. No hype, no gimmicks. We'll see you next time.